2021 was yet another exhausting and often tragic year for those on the front line against COVID. But in the lead up to the new year, there was some good news in some parts of the world, with the approval of 2 antiviral drugs, which were found to cut hospitalisations and deaths in clinical trials. So could antivirals be the next piece of the puzzle to help us to live with the SARS-CoV-2 virus?
So you're talking with an antiviral guy, so this is my area.
Peter Anderson is a professor of pharmaceutical sciences at the University of Colorado.
Just think of the impact that antivirals have had on other viral illnesses. I mean, they've changed HIV into a manageable, disease. Hepatitis C is curable. Hepatitis B is manageable. So these can be highly, highly efficacious medications. That is direct acting antivirals. And so I'm excited. I think if we can use them early enough in the course of illness, I think they're going to have a big impact.
Most antiviral drugs target specific viruses, others a broad spectrum covering a wide range. While most antibiotics destroy the target pathogen, antivirals inhibit its development. The first 2 new antivirals to be approved for use against COVID-19 are Malnutrition, developed by Merck, which reduced hospitalisations by 30% in trials, and Pfizer's drug Paxlovid, which achieved 89%. Professor Sei Koo leads Agile, a coronavirus drug initiative in the UK, which investigates new potential COVID-19 treatments. How might this change how we deal with the pandemic?
People always think, is this a case of vaccines or antivirals? I think it's a case of the vaccines to prevent infection, and that's going to do the majority of heavy lifting in this pandemic. And then at the other end of the scale, there's the interventions to stop people from dying who have severe disease. So this is things that you read about in the recovery trial, the use of steroids and other medications. But in between, there has been an area which is largely under-delivered until now. The licensing of molnupiravir heralds an age of orally available drugs, which are going to get better and better and better, and much more potent at suppressing viral multiplication and at preventing people from going into hospital.
Professor Koo was involved in phases 1 and 2 of the molnupiravir trials. The drug targets an enzyme the virus uses to make copies, causing it to introduce errors into its genetic code. Eventually, so many errors are made, the virus can no longer survive. Lowering the viral load in this way reduces the severity of the disease. There were concerns Molnupiravir and Paxlovid were authorised too quickly in the UK.
I completely understand that. I think the UK regulator has taken the view that business cannot continue as normal during a pandemic. And so how do you make the same decisions you would make in peacetime during a pandemic that are quick and yet sufficiently robust? And the MHRA has taken a very pragmatic view. Different regulators will take different views.
There were no safety concerns in the trials, which were also placebo-controlled, which is the gold standard when it comes to evaluating efficacy and safety. But every country has its own regulators. For example, in the UK, there are protections in place, as Dr. Shuli Porkis, the Vice President of the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine in London, explains.
Molnupiravir and Paxlovid have both got to a point of something called conditional approval, which is when the regulators have looked at the information from the companies, so including clinical trial information, and the regulators have said, yes, that we can see that the medicines show that they work, that they have met the safety standards, and that we're able to give this conditional approval. Once any medicine has any type of approval, it is continuously monitored for any new issues, any safety issues, to actually see how it works in the real world.
Because the first trials of antivirals began shortly after COVID first arrived, they were tested almost totally on the unvaccinated. But in the UK, 71.5% of the population has had 2 vaccine doses and 54.5% have also had the booster top-up. So an Oxford University study called Panoramic will assess the impact of antivirals on vulnerable but vaccinated people in the UK.
the companies also need to submit more information from trials as it becomes available. And the regulators will keep looking at it and saying, okay, is the information we have on the medicine, is it up to date? Do we need to change it at all? Do we need to give different instructions on how the medicine should be used in clinical practice?
There has been some talk about possible side effects from molnupiravir that suggest it may cause mutations in human DNA. What do you say to that?
So this is an area of quite a considerable amount of controversy at the moment. And I think it's important to remember that no drug, when it's licensed, can ever be declared truly safe. I think that's really important. It's never happened in the history of drug development. You really only know that something's safe where years and years down the line, with tens of thousands of people exposed to the drug. So all you can say is that a drug is sufficiently safe for deployment. And that bar has been met as far as the MHRA are concerned. That regulatory hurdle has been overcome. Now, that's not to say that the drug is totally safe. And I think that we do need to worry. So the mechanism of action for molnupiravir is one of creating lethal mutagenesis. That is to say that it becomes incorporated into the viral genome and then forces the virus to mutate to the point that the virus it becomes extinct. And because those mutations are catastrophic. The question then is, does it do that to human DNA? And there are mixed results about that. The conventional tests that are applied to any drug entering pharmaceutical evaluation suggest that it is safe enough, with the caveats that I've said. But there are some novel tests that are not part of the usual assessment, the battery of assessments, which have cast some questions about its long-term safety. But I think in terms of risk, you're giving a drug for actually quite a relatively short period of time. For in some people, potentially quite severe illness. So I think it's always a case of balancing risks against potential benefits.
Molnupiravir is not recommended during pregnancy or when breastfeeding. There are also concerns over damage to sperm, so it's advised to wait 3 months once finished taking the antiviral before trying to conceive. Like molnupiravir, Pfizer's Paxlovid also aims to stop the virus from replicating, but uses a slightly different method. While it's 89% effective in patients at risk, there are some safety issues.
So it is actually 2 medications. One is nirmatrelvir, and then the other one is ritonavir.
Nirmatrelvir is the new antiviral against COVID, and ritonavir boosts its activity, preventing the breakdown of it in the body. But the concern is ritonavir may also affect other drugs the patient may be taking.
Some of these interactions are not small and trivial. Some are very large. They cause very large increases in the other drugs. I'm talking about antiarrhythmics, immunosuppressants, some blood thinners. So those kinds of classes of drugs. In some of those drugs, you cannot pair them. You cannot give them with ritonavir.
Many tools are needed to combat COVID. Different therapies work on different parts of the virus, depending on what the patient needs and how sick they are. While many scientists would argue prevention is better than a cure, in places where there are low vaccination rates, antivirals could save lives. Do we know how effective these new antivirals are with the latest dominant variant Omicron?
So far, the direct-acting antivirals that we're talking about, molnupiravir and Paxlovid, appear to be active against all the variants. Typically with the variants, the thing that's changing in the virus is more of the spike protein, and that's the concern with, will vaccines retain their efficacy? So these drugs don't work that way. They work on different steps in the life cycle. There's been no reason for those, or less reason for there to be mutations in those other steps that would cause resistance to the antivirals.
But we still don't know when we'll see more antivirals approved for use.
One that I've heard of recently is an oral version of remdesivir being developed. So remdesivir at the moment is intravenous. So something that can be taken as a tablet or capsule will potentially be helpful. There are also other treatments such as the neutralizing monoclonal antibodies that help provide passive immunities, so helping your immune system fight the virus. And there are some of those coming into use at the moment, but it's definitely an area to watch in terms of new ones being approved for use potentially, or potentially for a broader use. And also we're now working out how we best combine all the different things we have, whether it's from masks and ventilation or vaccines or boosters or treatments. We're now saying actually we've got lots of things to look at, lots more coming. How do we best put them together in the right way across the world?
There will be further research and trials done and questions asked about these antivirals. Will they affect transmission of the virus or prevent illness in people who've been exposed to it? Will they work against all variants in a real-world setting? And could the virus become resistant to antivirals? But there's also a very human question.
Do you think we'll see the same hesitancy with antivirals as we did with the vaccines?
That's a hard one because it's early days. There are people who might not want to receive vaccines, and there are people for whom vaccines have less benefit, so they have weakened immune systems and cancers and bone marrow transplants that prevent their immune system from mounting a sufficiently robust response. So for those people, antivirals will be a safety net. Now, will we see hesitancy with antivirals? I don't know. I hope not.